In the heart of American politics, a storm is brewing, one that pits the country's most influential minds and leaders against the very core of Trump's judicial legacy. This isn't just about one man or one ruling, it's about a clash of ideals that could redefine the future of democracy itself. Across the nation, political heavyweights, legal scholars, and everyday citizens are rising in unison, voicing a shared concern that the foundations of justice are being eroded under the weight of partisan influence. From heated debates in Congress to fiery discussions on college campuses, the air is thick with urgency. Social media timelines are flooded with impassioned speeches, viral protest footage, and calls to action, all fueled by a growing conviction that silence is no longer an option. The revolt is not chaotic. It is deliberate, organized, and intellectual, with thought leaders shaping the narrative and rallying support. This is a turning point, a battle not fought with weapons, but with ideas, unity, and an unyielding demand for truth. And as the pressure builds, one question remains: can the court and the country withstand this unprecedented wave of resistance? The first key point revolves around the deepening discontent among leaders and intellectuals who believe that Trump's influence over the court is not only a political overreach, but a dangerous precedent for the integrity of the judicial system. Many argue that the court as an institution should be the ultimate guardian of impartiality, an arena where truth is weighed above personal loyalties or political affiliations. Yet, under Trump's tenure and in the wake of his appointments, there is a growing perception that the balance of justice is being tilted to favor an ideological agenda. This perception isn't confined to one side of the political spectrum. Even some who have historically supported conservative policies now voice unease over what they see as a narrowing space for objective interpretation of the law. For them, the worry is not just about the current rulings, but about the long-term consequences. How such precedents might embolden future leaders to manipulate the court to suit their own vision of governance. These fears are amplified by a series of high-profile decisions that seem to align more with political loyalty than judicial reasoning, eroding public trust in a body that was once seen as untouchable in its fairness. Prominent legal scholars have published essays and op-eds dissecting these trends, warning that when a court is perceived as partisan, its legitimacy suffers an irreparable blow. Across think tanks, universities, and media platforms, debates rage over whether the court can still claim to serve as an independent check on executive power. In political circles, former allies of the Trump administration express quiet concern, noting that while appointing sympathetic judges may offer short-term victories, it risks damaging the very credibility of the judiciary for decades to come. These conversations have spilled beyond the confines of policy discussions and into the public consciousness, sparking demonstrations, televised debates, and viral social media campaigns demanding accountability and reform. Leaders from diverse sectors, politics, academia, civil rights organizations are uniting over a shared fear that the erosion of judicial independence is a threat to democracy itself. They see the court not merely as an arbiter of legal disputes, but as the final safeguard against the abuse of power, a safeguard they believe is being weakened. This shared perception has galvanized movements aimed at pressuring lawmakers to consider structural changes to the judicial system, from term limits for justices to greater transparency in appointments. Whether these changes will materialize remains uncertain, but the growing coalition of voices signals a shift in the national mood. What was once quiet concern has transformed into a loud, coordinated challenge, an insistence that the court must serve the people, not the ambitions of any one leader. For many, this is no longer a question of politics, it's a question of preserving the very principles upon which the United States was built. The second key point focuses on the cultural and ideological backlash that Trump's court influence has ignited, particularly among those who see it as part of a broader attempt to reshape American values in his image. This movement is not just a legal or political dispute, it has become a cultural battle over the identity and future direction of the United States. The court's recent decisions, heavily influenced by Trump-appointed justices, are viewed by critics as signaling a shift toward a more rigid, exclusionary interpretation of the Constitution, one that risks reversing decades of social progress. For many, this represents an attempt to impose a singular worldview on a nation that prides itself on diversity and pluralism. Intellectuals, artists, and public commentators have drawn historical parallels to other moments when the judiciary became a tool for reinforcing political dominance rather than safeguarding freedoms. They argue that America's strength has always been its ability to adapt, to incorporate new voices into the national conversation, and to evolve its understanding of rights and justice in step with societal change. Yet they fear that this adaptability is being stifled by a court majority that seems intent on freezing the country in a particular ideological moment. This fear has sparked intense debates in classrooms, town halls, and online platforms, with many younger Americans expressing concern that their future is being defined by decisions rooted in outdated values. Activists have organized marches, panel discussions, and awareness campaigns to highlight the potential human cost of these rulings, from restrictions on reproductive rights to the narrowing of protections for marginalized communities. The resistance isn't confined to traditionally liberal circles. Some conservatives, especially libertarians, worry about the centralization of moral authority in the hands of a few justices, seeing it as antithetical to individual freedoms. This cross-ideological unease has given rise to unexpected alliances where people who disagree on many policy issues find common ground in defending the principle of judicial neutrality. The cultural revolt also extends beyond domestic borders, as international observers question whether America can continue to present itself as a champion of democracy and human rights while its highest court appears so politically entangled. Media coverage has amplified these concerns, with documentaries, investigative reports, and opinion pieces dissecting the court's trajectory and its broader societal implications. The arts have also become a vehicle for protest, with playwrights, filmmakers, and musicians weaving themes of judicial bias and political overreach into their work, aiming to inspire reflection and dialogue. This cultural mobilization is as much about safeguarding the soul of the nation as it is about legal reform. People sense that the fight over the court's direction is, in reality, a fight over the values that will define America for generations. Whether through political activism, creative expression, or grassroots education, the message from this coalition is clear: a nation's laws must reflect the will and rights of its people, not the ambitions of a single leader or faction. The court, they insist, should stand above partisan tides, serving as the conscience of the country rather than the instrument of its political battles. The third key point centers on the political ramifications of this revolt, where opposition to Trump's influence over the court is no longer limited to ideological or cultural critics, but is rapidly becoming a defining force in electoral politics. For decades, judicial appointments have been a strategic tool used by both parties to cement their visions of the nation's future. But the current moment feels different because of the sheer intensity of public engagement. Polls indicate that trust in the Supreme Court has dropped to historic lows, and political challengers across the spectrum are seizing on this as a campaign issue. Candidates are framing the fight over the court not simply as a legal debate, but as a battle for democracy itself, warning that concentrated judicial power in the hands of a few politically aligned justices could undermine the checks and balances that are foundational to the republic. The revolt has triggered an influx of grassroots organizing, with community leaders and local activists pushing for structural reforms such as term limits for justices, stricter ethics oversight, and even expansion of the court to rebalance its ideological composition. These proposals, once considered fringe ideas, are now entering mainstream political discourse, supported by growing segments of the electorate frustrated with what they perceive as a politicized and unaccountable judiciary. Political thinkers argue that this disillusionment with the court could reshape voter priorities in upcoming elections, potentially mobilizing demographics that have historically been less active in judicial politics. For instance, younger voters who have traditionally focused more on climate policy, student debt, or social justice are increasingly connecting those issues to the long-term influence of court decisions. In response, political campaigns are tailoring their messaging to emphasize the tangible impacts that judicial rulings have on everyday life. from healthcare access to workplace rights. The backlash is also influencing intra-party dynamics, with some Republicans distancing themselves from Trump's judicial legacy to appeal to moderates, while others double down in defense of the appointments as victories for conservative governance. This division within the GOP mirrors the national split, adding an extra layer of complexity to the upcoming electoral landscape. Meanwhile, Democratic leaders are using the revolt as a rallying cry to unify disparate wings of their party under a shared banner of institutional reform. The heightened focus on the court has also affected fundraising patterns, with political action committees and advocacy groups seeing record donations tied to judicial issues. This money is being funneled into targeted ad campaigns, voter education drives, and legal challenges aimed at limiting or overturning controversial decisions. As the political battle lines harden, it is becoming clear that the revolt against Trump's court is not a passing moment of outrage, but a sustained movement with the potential to redefine party platforms and national debates for years to come. What once seemed like an abstract concern, judicial independence, has become a visceral political priority, energizing voters who now see the court's makeup as inseparable from the future of American democracy. In this sense, the revolt is not just against Trump or his appointed justices, but against an entire system that many believe has allowed partisanship to overtake justice itself. The fourth key point revolves around the cultural and societal shift that this revolt has triggered as it moves beyond political circles and into the broader public consciousness, reshaping how Americans talk about justice, fairness, and the rule of law. What began as a dispute among political leaders and thinkers has spilled into everyday conversations, at workplaces and classrooms, over family dinners, creating a new level of civic awareness. For many people, the court was once a distant institution, an abstract pillar of governance that operated largely out of view. Now it has become a daily talking point, with decisions and controversies dissected in news outlets, podcasts, and social media platforms that reach millions. The cultural impact lies in the way these discussions are reframing the role of the judiciary from a detached, almost mystical body into a highly visible and contested arena of power. This visibility is driving both inspiration and disillusionment. On one hand, it has encouraged a surge of civic engagement, with more people attending local government meetings, studying constitutional law, or joining activist organizations focused on judicial reform. On the other hand, it has deepened cynicism in segments of the population who see the court as permanently compromised, leading to a dangerous erosion of trust in the institution's ability to deliver impartial justice. The revolt has also prompted artists, filmmakers, and cultural commentators to weave themes of judicial overreach, corruption, and reform into their work, amplifying the message to audiences who might not follow political news closely. Memes, viral videos, and satirical sketches are distilling complex judicial controversies into digestible cultural moments that resonate emotionally, especially among younger generations. In this way, the conversation about Trump's court has become part of a larger cultural narrative about power, morality, and the kind of country America aspires to be. It is influencing the language people use when they talk about rights and freedoms, making terms like checks and balances and judicial ethics part of everyday vocabulary. Social movements unrelated to the court, such as those focused on environmental justice or healthcare access, are increasingly tying their messaging back to judicial decisions, recognizing that cultural change must be paired with institutional accountability. The revolt has even impacted educational spaces, with teachers and professors using it as a case study to teach students about constitutional law, civic duty, and the long-term consequences of political appointments. Beyond education, religious leaders, business owners, and community organizers are also weighing in, connecting the court's decisions to moral frameworks and ethical responsibilities in ways that influence community values. This cultural saturation means the revolt is no longer just a moment of political disagreement. It is a societal reckoning with how justice should be defined and who gets to define it. It has forced Americans to confront uncomfortable questions about whether the ideals written into the Constitution are truly being upheld or if they are being selectively interpreted to serve partisan agendas. This deep and ongoing engagement is perhaps the most transformative aspect of the revolt, because once people begin to see the court not as an untouchable authority, but as a human institution subject to scrutiny, they cannot easily return to indifference. In that sense, the cultural shift may outlast the political crisis that sparked it, leaving a permanent mark on the nation's collective understanding of justice and governance. In the end, what we are witnessing is more than just a political clash. It is a defining moment for America's conscience. The revolt against Trump's court represents a refusal to quietly accept the erosion of principles that were meant to safeguard the nation's integrity. Leaders, thinkers, and ordinary citizens alike are challenging the idea that power can be exercised without accountability, that justice can be bent without consequence. This movement has not only exposed the cracks in the system, but has also illuminated the power of collective resistance, proving that when voices rise in unison, even the most entrenched institutions must take notice. Whether the outcome leads to reform or deepens division, one truth is clear: the struggle for an honest and impartial court is, at its core, the struggle for the very soul of American democracy. And in that struggle, silence is no longer an option.